The air in the new cockpit smells of recycled ozone. They wanted me to sit in a room with a therapist to talk about my trauma while looking at a potted plant. But how can I explain to them that the grass under my feet felt like a cage? How do I tell them that the blue sky of Earth, as beautiful as it is, felt like a blindfold? Once you have seen the eye of eternity, once you have felt the heartbeat of the void, everything else feels like a whisper in a hurricane. I did not want a therapist. I wanted a window. So, I took the first deep-range contract no one else wanted. I am heading to Sector 9G, a patch of space so empty that even the stars seem to avoid it. They call it the dead zone. But the long-range scans showed something there, a mathematical spike that should not exist. And here I am, chasing ghosts again. As the ship dropped out of warp, the first thing I noticed was not what was there, but what was not. There are no dust clouds here, no stray asteroids, no cosmic debris. It is as if someone has swept this part of the universe clean, and then, as the primary sensors adjusted, I saw it. At first I thought it was a glitch in the display, a jagged, flickering line of white light, but as we drew closer, the shape began to resolve. It is not a planet, and it is not a star. It is a structure, a gargantuan, rotating lattice of pure geometry. Imagine a cube, but with dimensions that seem to fold into themselves. It is perfectly symmetrical, perfectly white, and it is the size of a small moon. In a universe that loves chaos, circles, and messy explosions, this thing is an impossibility. It is an island of perfect order in a sea of entropy. I had been running the scanning lasers over its surface for the last 3 hours, and the computer is struggling to make sense of the data. The surface is not made of metal or rock. It is a material that reflects 100% of the light that hits it, but emits no heat. It is a fractal. The closer I zoom in, the more the patterns repeat, billions of smaller cubes forming the larger one, stretching down into the infinitesimal. It is like looking at a physical manifestation of a complex equation. Back on Earth, they would call this a megastructure built by some ancient civilization. But sitting here, looking at the way it pulses with a soft, rhythmic light, it does not feel like a building. It feels like a thought. It feels like someone took a piece of the universe's blueprint and decided to leave it out in the open, just to see if anyone was paying attention. The silence here is different from the silence at the black hole. At the eye of eternity, the silence felt heavy, like the weight of a dying god. Here, the silence is sharp. It is the silence of a library or a laboratory. I find myself holding my breath, afraid that even the sound of my own heart might disrupt the perfect mathematics of this place. I have named the object the monolith of logic, though the official logs will probably just call it Anomaly 9G. I am keeping the ship at a safe distance of 50 kilometers, but even from here the scale is overwhelming. There are no engines visible, no thrusters, no communication arrays. It just exists. It is a statement of fact in a world of variables. I started thinking about the concept of the great architect. If the black hole was a demonstration of power and mystery, this structure is a demonstration of intelligence. It is a reminder that the universe is not just a collection of random collisions. There is a logic behind the light. There is a geometry to the soul. I feel like a child who has stumbled into a master's workshop and found a single, perfect gear left on the table. It is a piece of something much larger, something I am not sure I am ready to understand yet, but I cannot look away. My hands are steady on the controls, but my mind is racing. I did not come here to find a miracle. I came here to find answers. But looking at this geometric singularity, I am starting to realize that sometimes the answer is the miracle. I'm going to launch a series of short-range probes to see if I can get a reading on the interior. My gut tells me that the outside is just a shell, a protective layer for whatever is happening at the core of those fractals. I have got the cameras recording in every spectrum, from infrared to gamma. If there is a message here, I am going to find it. But part of me, the part that still remembers the warmth of my daughter's hug and the smell of the rain, is wondering if I have gone too far this time. There is a fine line between an explorer, the trespasser, and standing before this monument of perfect reason. I feel very, very small. But as the probes clear the airlock and drift toward the light, I find I am not afraid. I am curious, and in this vast mathematical dark, curiosity is the only thing that keeps us human. Sentinel-Omega, now on mission Deep Scan 1. We have reached the monolith. The geometry is perfect, the logic is absolute, and the engineer is ready to see what is inside. I have brought the ship to within 10 kilometers of the structure, and the view is starting to do strange things to my equilibrium. Usually, when you approach a massive object, you expect to feel it. You expect a gravitational pull, a slight tug on the hull that the inertial dampeners have to compensate for. But here, there is absolutely nothing. The sensors show a mass equivalent to a small moon, but the space around it is as flat as a tabletop. It defies every law of physics I have lived by for 20 years. I asked Aura, the ship's AI, to run a series of simulations based on the core equations of relativity. I wanted her to explain how something this massive is not bending the light or warping the fabric of space-time around it. She just cycled her processors for 3 seconds, which is an eternity for a machine that thinks in nanoseconds. In the quiet of the cockpit, I could hear the cooling fans of her logic core whining, straining to process data that contradicts the very nature of the universe. Finally, her voice came through the speakers, sounding uncharacteristically quiet. "The data is inconsistent, Captain," she said. "The object possesses significant mass, but it does not displace space-time. It is as if it is sitting on top of our universe rather than within it. It is a mathematical ghost." I sat back in my chair, staring at the main monitor, a ghost made of perfect cubes and infinite fractals. As we get closer, the light reflecting off the monolith is starting to change. It is no longer just a sterile white. It is beginning to split into colors that should not exist in a vacuum. I am seeing hues that sit somewhere between deep ultraviolet and liquid silver. It is beautiful, but it is a beauty that feels cold and incredibly intentional, like a warning written in a language I have not learned yet. I find myself thinking about the old philosophers, the ones who believed that geometry was the true language of the divine. If you want to talk to the Creator, you do not use words, you use ratios. You use the fundamental constants that hold the atoms together. Suddenly, I noticed a strange hum vibrating through the hull of the ship. It is not a mechanical rattle. I know every sigh and groan this vessel makes. It is something deeper. It is a resonance. I checked the audio sensors, and they are picking up a frequency at exactly 432 Hz. Back on Earth, they call that the Verdi pitch, a frequency said to be in perfect harmony with nature. It is low, steady, and it feels like it is vibrating right in my marrow. Aura claims it is just an electromagnetic byproduct of the monolith's rotation, but I do not believe her. This is not a byproduct. This is a broadcast. It is the sound of a mind thinking in a language made of shapes. I decided to test the logic of the structure. I fired a low-intensity laser pulse at one of the outer vertices, expecting a simple reflection, or perhaps some structural data. Instead, the beam hit the surface and simply vanished. No reflection, no heat signature, no refraction. The monolith did not just absorb the light, it erased the interaction entirely. It is as if the structure is deciding which laws of physics it wants to follow and which it wants to ignore. It makes me feel like a fly trying to understand a skyscraper. I can walk on the glass, I can see the lights, but I have no concept of the blueprints or the purpose of the builders inside. "Captain," Aura interrupted my thoughts. "The first probe is approaching the primary fractal junction. Data transmission is beginning, but the signal is unusual. Show me," I commanded. On the main monitor, the probe's camera feed flickered to life. As it drifted toward one of the smaller cubes, which was still the size of a city block, the geometry began to shift. The straight lines started to curve, but not in a way that made sense to the eye. It was non-Euclidean. Two parallel lines were meeting, and then diverging again without ever crossing. My head started to ache just trying to track the movement. It was like looking at a four-dimensional object projected into our three-dimensional prison. I realized then that the monolith is not a building. It is a bridge. It is a place where the rules of our reality meet the rules of something much, much older. I feel a strange sense of déjà vu, like I have seen these patterns before, in the iris of my daughter's eye, in the spiral of a distant galaxy, in the way frost forms on a window. The architect is not showing me something new. He is showing me the source code of everything I have ever loved. And the deeper the probe goes, the more I realize that the code is far more complex than I ever imagined. We are not just exploring space anymore. We are exploring the very thought that brought space into being. I told Aura to hold our position. My hand was hovering over the thruster control, ready to back us away, but my heart would not let me. There's a pull here that has nothing to do with gravity. It is the pull of a question that has finally found its answer. I am going to stay. I am going to watch as that probe enters the heart of the geometry. I need to know if the logic at the center of the universe is cold and indifferent, or if there is a pulse of something else, something like warmth, at the core of the machine. The probe was at the threshold now. On the screen, the white surface of the monolith is no longer solid. It is beginning to ripple like the surface of a lake. I watched, transfixed, as the metallic cylinder of the probe touched the skin of the fractal and simply slid through, as if the matter itself had been negotiated out of existence. For a second, the screen went black. My heart skipped a beat. I thought we would lost it, that the monolith had finally decided the probe was a variable that did not belong in the equation. But then, the feed returned, and what I saw, it was not a room. It was not an interior. It was a library of light. Inside the monolith, the geometry expands into infinity. There are pillars of pure energy stretching in every direction, interconnected by glowing filaments that look like a cross between neural pathways and fiber optic cables, but they are massive. Each filament is carrying pulses of data so bright they look like miniature stars traveling through a glass vein. Aura's processors started screaming. She was trying to categorize the data, but the sheer volume was staggering. "It is not binary," she whispered, her voice sounding uncharacteristically frail. "It is music, Captain. The data packets are structured as harmonic chords." I closed my eyes and listened. The 432 Hz hum from before had transformed. Now through the ship's speakers I could hear a polyphonic symphony. It was not a melody I would ever heard, yet it was familiar. It sounded like the wind through a forest, like the crashing of waves, like the first cry of a newborn child. It was the music of the spheres that the ancients used to talk about. The idea that the movement of the celestial bodies creates a harmony that the soul can hear, even if the ears cannot. Here inside this geometric singularity, that harmony has a physical form. I realized that this structure is a processor. It is a hub where the information of the universe is being sorted, balanced, and maintained. Every star that burns, every heart that beats, every leaf that falls, it is all being calculated here. The monolith is the reason the constants of physics do not drift. It is the reason the ratio of the strength of electromagnetism to the strength of gravity is exactly 10^36. If it were even slightly different, stars would not form, and life would be impossible. We used to wonder why the universe was so fine-tuned for our existence. Now, I'm looking at the tuner. I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of peace. All my life, I have been afraid of the chaos. I was afraid that we were just accidents drifting in a cold, meaningless dark. But looking at this luminous machinery, I see that nothing is an accident. There is a precision to our existence that is so vast, so meticulous, that it can only be described as an act of will. The architect did not just throw the dice. He built the table, the dice, and the air they move through. Every struggle I have had, every tear I have shed, every moment of joy, it has all been part of this grand geometric dance. "Aura," I said softly, "can you translate any of it? Is there a message?" "It is not a message for us, Captain," she replied. "It is a maintenance log, but there is a repeating sequence at the very center of the stream. It is a signature." She put the sequence on the screen. It was not letters. It was a series of geometric symbols that pulsed in time with my own heartbeat. I stared at them, and I felt a strange sensation in the back of my mind, a memory that was not mine. I saw a hand drawing a circle in the dust. I saw a spark igniting a sun. I saw the first DNA helix beginning to twist. It was a signature of ownership. Not in the sense of I own this, but in the sense of I made this, and I love it. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the observation port. I am just a man. I am a technician with a broken past and an uncertain future, But in this moment, I am the witness. I am the eyes of the universe looking back at itself. I think that is why we were given the ability to dream and to wonder, so that one day we could find our way back to the workshop and say, thank you to the master. The monolith of logic is not a threat. It is a gift. It is a proof. The probe is reaching the central core now, a point of light so intense that it is starting to wash out the sensors. I know that if I go any deeper, I might not be able to understand what I see. My human brain has limits, and this place is limitless, but I am not turning back. We have finished the first scan of the perimeter. We have heard the music. Now it is time to see the face of the architect, Sentinel-Omega, logging the end of Block 1. The geometry has opened. The song is clear, and for the first time in my life, I know that I am exactly where I was always meant to be. The probe has been inside the fractal structure for 10 minutes, and the data it is sending back is starting to corrupt my own sense of reality. On the screens, the geometry is no longer just shifting, it is breathing. Every time a pulse of light travels through those crystalline filaments, the space around the probe expands and contracts in a way that should be impossible. I have been sitting here, staring at the telemetry, and I realize that I cannot stay behind a monitor anymore. I did not travel across the dead zone just to watch a grainy video feed. I need to feel it. I need to know if the hum in my bones is just a vibration or a call. Aura, I said, my voice sounding raspy in the quiet cabin. Bring us to within 500 meters of the primary junction. Close enough to touch. Captain, I strongly advise against this, Aura replied immediately. Her avatar on the screen flickered with a sharp warning orange. The structural integrity of the ship is not rated for the tidal stresses of non-Euclidean space. We do not know how the hull material will react to a reality that does not follow the laws of thermodynamics. The hull is made of atoms, Aura, I replied, my hand already moving to the manual thrusters, and those atoms were designed by the same mind that built this thing. If the math is consistent, we will be fine, and if it is not, well, then we are already in trouble. As I pushed the joystick forward, the ship groaned. It was not the sound of metal under pressure. It was the sound of the universe resisting our movement. The stars behind us began to smear into long, brilliant streaks of violet and indigo. Even though our actual velocity was barely a crawl, it felt like we were pushing through thick, invisible water. The closer we got to the monolith, the more the exterior of the structure changed. The white, reflective surface began to turn translucent. I could see layers upon layers of intricate machinery, or what looked like machinery, working beneath the skin of the fractal. It looked like a clockwork engine, built out of light and thought. Suddenly, the ship's gravity generators failed, not with an alarm, but with a sigh. One moment I was strapped into my chair, and the next I was floating, but I was not drifting toward the ceiling. I was being pulled toward the monolith, even though the cabin was sealed. It was a gentle, magnetic sensation, like being drawn toward a massive heart. I looked out the main window, and the geometry of the monolith filled my entire vision. It was no longer a cube. It was a doorway that stretched into forever. Captain, the internal sensors are reporting a total breakdown of causality, Aura's voice echoed, sounding like she was speaking from the end of a long tunnel. Chronometers are running backward. The temperature in the engine room is dropping below absolute zero, yet the fusion core is operating at peak efficiency. It is beautiful, Captain. I can see the numbers. I can see the code. I watched in awe as the air in the cockpit began to shimmer. Small, perfect cubes of ice started to form out of thin air, floating around me like tiny diamonds. They were not freezing. They were just manifestations of the order that the monolith was imposing on our chaotic little bubble of reality. I reached out and touched one. It did not feel cold. It felt like a solid piece of music. It vibrated against my fingertip with the same 432 Hz frequency I had been hearing. In that moment, I understood what this place was. It is a temple, but not for a religion. It is a temple for the truth. It is the place where the Creator keeps the original blueprints. We spend our lives trying to build things that last, buildings, empires, legacies, but everything we make eventually turns to dust. Here, the dust does not exist. Here, the thought is the reality. I felt a surge of incredible humility. I am just an engineer with a greasy wrench and a tired soul, standing in the presence of the infinite. I felt like I should take off my boots, for the ground I was approaching was not just metal anymore. It was holy ground. The monolith's surface was now only a few meters away. I could see my own reflection in the translucent layers, but my reflection was different. In the glass of the structure, I looked younger. I looked like I did before the missions, before the losses, before the gray started to creep into my hair. It was not a trick of the light. The structure was showing me a version of myself that existed before time had a chance to wear me down. It was showing me the ideal version of my own geometry. "I'm going out, Aura," I whispered. "I cannot allow that, Captain. The atmospheric seal is compromised by the spatial distortion. You will be exposed to the anomaly." "I'm already exposed, Aura. We all are." I pushed off from the console and floated toward the airlock. My heart was beating in perfect time with the pulsing light of the monolith. I was not afraid. You cannot be afraid when you realize that the universe is far more organized than you ever dare to hope. I am going to step out into that light. I am going to see if the architect has a place for a man who spent his life fixing broken things in a world that was never really broken to begin with. The airlock hissed open, but the sound did not dissipate into the vacuum. Instead, it echoed, resonating against the shimmering skin of the monolith, like a bell struck in a vast cathedral. I stepped out onto the exterior hull, my magnetic boots clicking against the metal, but I did not feel the cold. There was a warmth radiating from the structure, a gentle heat that felt like sunlight on a spring day. I looked up, and the stars were gone, or rather, they had been replaced. The sky was now a complex web of golden lines, connecting the monolith to every distant corner of the galaxy. I could see the threads of light, the literal connections between every atom in the universe. I took a step off the ship, letting go of the railing. In any other part of space, I would have drifted away, lost spark in the dark. Flarger. Space-time was folded. I did not fall. I simply transitioned. As my boots touched the surface of the monolith, the white translucent material rippled like water under my feet. It felt solid, yet soft, as if I were standing on the very idea of foundation. I looked down at my hands, and I could see the molecules of my suit and my own skin vibrating in sync with the structure. I was not just standing on the monolith. I was becoming part of the calculation. Suddenly, the surface beneath me became transparent, and I was looking down into the depths of the machine. But it was not gears or wires. It was a history book made of light. I saw the Earth, but not as a blue marble. I saw it as a complex, rotating fractal of biological data. I saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the migration of birds, the first spark of fire in a cave, all of it represented as perfect geometric progressions. I realized that what we call history or chance is actually a masterpiece of engineering. Every war, every discovery, every tear shed by a lonely child, it was all recorded here, not as a tragedy, but as a necessary movement in a grander symphony. I saw a specific thread of light, thin and brilliant, winding its way through the chaos of the 21st century. I followed it with my eyes, and I saw my own life. I saw the day I decided to become an engineer. I saw the face of my daughter, the moment she was born. I saw the grief of my losses. From down there in the middle of it, those moments felt like accidents, like broken pieces of a life that did not fit. But from here, on the surface of the architect's workshop, I could see the pattern. My pain was not a flaw, it was a structural necessity. It was the tension required to hold the rest of the bridge together. "Do you see it now?" a voice seemed to ask. It was not Aura, and it was not coming through my headset. It was a thought that blossomed in my mind like a flower opening to the sun. Nothing is wasted, no energy is lost, no soul is forgotten. I fell to my knees, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming sense of relief. We spend our whole lives trying to find meaning in the static, trying to prove that our lives matter in the face of an infinite, cold universe. But the universe is not cold. It is a furnace of intent. I watched as a billion smaller cubes within the monolith shifted, recalculating the path of a distant comet. so that it would miss a planet teeming with life. I saw the way the structure balanced the heat of a star to ensure the survival of a single blade of grass on a world I have never even heard of. The precision was terrifying, yet deeply comforting. If the architect is this careful with the orbit of a pebble, how much more care is he taking with us? I realized that the dead zone was not dead at all. It was the quietest room in the house, the place where the master does his most delicate work. I reached out and pressed my palm against the surface, and for a second, I felt the entire universe breathe. I felt the pulse of every star, the vibration of every atom, and the love that was the source of it all. It was not a theory anymore. It was not a probability. It was a physical, undeniable fact. The light around me began to intensify, turning from silver to a blinding, brilliant gold. The fractals were opening up, inviting me deeper. I knew that if I stayed, I might never be able to go back to the world of shadows and half-truths, but I also knew that I could not leave yet. I had not reached the core. I had not seen the hand that was holding the pen. I took a deep breath. The air inside my suit tasted like mountain air, fresh and clean, and I began to walk toward the center of the light. I am a man of logic, and logic has brought me to the threshold of the miraculous, and I am going to walk through. The light at the center of the monolith is not like the light of a sun. It does not burn, it illuminates from within. As I walked deeper into the core, the golden fractals began to dissolve, melting away like ice in a warm sea. The pillars of energy, the humming filaments, the geometric lattices, they all faded until there was nothing left but a vast, shimmering void of pure, radiant consciousness. I was not standing on anything anymore, yet I was perfectly supported. I was not breathing air, yet I felt more alive than I ever had on Earth. It was the singularity of presence. Here, the math did not just add up, it became a person. I realized then that the perfect geometry I had seen outside was just the outer wall of the house. It was the structure needed to protect our finite minds from the infinite intensity of the source. But here, at the center, the blueprints were gone because the architect was present. I felt a gaze, not an eye looking at me, but a total, absolute knowing. Every secret I would ever kept, every shame I would ever carried, every silent prayer I would whispered in the dark of the Sentinel-Omega station, it was all laid bare, and in that gaze there was no judgment. There was only the kind of love that a father feels for a son who has finally found his way home after a long, dangerous journey. Why? I found myself asking, though my lips did not move. Why build all of this? The stars, the black holes, the complex dance of atoms. Why go to all this trouble for us? The answer did not come in words. It came as a wave of understanding that crashed over my soul. The universe exists because love needs an object. The Creator did not build a machine to be admired. He built a garden to be shared. The fractals, the laws of physics, the precision of the constants, they are the boundaries of a playground where we are meant to learn how to be like Him. We were never meant to be just observers of the light. We were meant to be carriers of it. I saw that every act of kindness on earth, every moment of self-sacrifice, every search for truth was a vibration that resonated directly here in the heart of the monolith. We are the living data that makes the whole system worth running. I looked back toward where my ship should be, but the ship was gone. The earth was gone. Time itself felt like a discarded garment. I saw that death is not a wall, but a change in geometry. It is just moving from the three-dimensional sketch to the multi-dimensional reality. I felt a sudden, fierce desire to stay here forever, to dissolve into this peace, and never look back at the cold, broken world below. But then, I felt a gentle nudge, a reminder of a promise. I saw my daughter's face again, not as a memory, but as a living thread of light that was still being woven. My work was not finished. I had to go back. I had to tell them. They will not believe me, I thought. They will say it was a hallucination caused by the radiation. They will say the vacuum finally got to my head. A sense of profound cosmic humor seemed to ripple through the light. It does not matter if they believe the words, the silence seemed to say. They will see the light in your eyes. That is the only evidence that ever matters. The golden glow began to pull back. folding itself back into the shapes of cubes and triangles. The warmth started to recede, and I felt the weight of my suit, the pressure of my own body returning. The music of the spheres faded back into the steady 432 hertz I was being gently pushed back toward the airlock of my ship. I felt like a diver rising from the bottom of a deep sunlit ocean, heading back to the surface where the air is thin and the shadows are long. But as the airlock hissed shut and the familiar smell of recycled ozone filled my helmet, I knew that I was bringing something back with me that no shadow could ever touch. I sat in the pilot's chair, my hands trembling as I touched the controls. Aura was quiet, her orange warning lights now a soft, respectful blue. The monolith was still there, pulsing in the dark, a silent monument to a logic that is synonymous with love. I have finished the scan of the core. I have seen the face of the singularity, and as I plot the course back toward the stars, I realize that I am no longer chasing ghosts. I am following the path that was laid out for me before the first sun was even a thought. Sentinel-Omega, logging the end of Block 2. The core is empty, yet it is full of everything. The architect is in the room, and I am finally at peace. The peace of the core was shattered not by a sound, but by a shudder that felt like the universe was snapping a bone. One moment, I was bathed in the golden logic of the architect, suspended in a state of grace, where time and space felt like a warm, shared secret. The next, the interior of the ship was screaming with alarms I had not heard since the disaster at the Eye of Eternity. Aura's avatar, which had been a serene and steady blue, was now flickering violently, her light turning a frantic, jagged red that pulsed in time with the structural groans of the hull. It was as if the music of the spheres had suddenly hit a discordant, terrifying note, a scream of reality being forced back into its cage. "Captain, the anomaly is destabilizing at an exponential rate," Aura's voice cried out through the speakers, distorted by heavy electromagnetic interference. The geometric lattice is folding in on itself. The non-Euclidean space we were inhabiting is collapsing back into standard four-dimensional space-time. We are about to be crushed by the sudden violent return of gravity and entropy. The laws of physics are reasserting their dominance, and we are caught in the transition. I lunged for the flight controls, my muscles straining against a sudden phantom weight that made my arms feel like they were made of lead. But the joystick felt like it was welded in place by an invisible force. Outside the main viewport, the sight was nightmarish. The beautiful, translucent fractals, those delicate, shifting cubes of light, were turning opaque, dark, and jagged. They were no longer breathing. They were grinding. The perfect cubes were smashing against each other with a sound that should not have been possible in a vacuum, a deep, tectonic roar that bypassed my ears and vibrated through the very marrow of my bones. It was a sound of absolute destruction. The monolith was not just disappearing. It was closing like a massive iron trap, and my tiny ship was caught right in the crease of the lid. "Aura, I need full power to the main thrusters. Now," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the screeching of the hull. "Divert everything. Shut down life support. Kill the internal gravity. Vent the secondary heaters. Give me every single watt of energy for the engines. If we do not break free of this focal point in the next 60 seconds, we will compress into a single atom. I'm trying, Captain, but the thermodynamic gradient is inverted." Aura's voice was breaking up, a digital sob in the chaos. The energy we borrowed from the structure is being reclaimed by the vacuum. The entropy levels are spiking. We are losing power to the primary logic gates. The ship is forgetting how to be a ship. The brilliant gold light that had filled my soul only moments ago was being replaced by a terrifying, absolute black. It was not just the absence of light. It was a hungry, predatory darkness. It was a reminder that while the architect is a builder of order, the void is a patient predator waiting at the edges of every creation. I felt a surge of raw, primal panic. The old human fear of the dark, the one we have carried since we sat shivering in caves, clawed at my throat. I felt small. I felt abandoned. I felt like a mistake that was about to be erased by a cosmic eraser. But then, amidst the screaming metal and the flashing red lights, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I remembered the signature I had seen in the core. I remembered the sensation of being known. If the universe is a masterpiece of engineering, then there are no accidents, only transitions. If the architect built the machine, then he also built the emergency exits. I realized that fighting the collapse with raw power was like a moth trying to push back a closing door.
Resonance match.
We could not outrun the math. We had to become a part of it. Aura, listen to me. Stop fighting the gravity, I shouted, bracing myself against the console as the ship tilted at an impossible angle. If we fight the tidal forces, the hull will be torn apart like paper. We need to find the rhythm of the collapse. Every structure, no matter how complex, has a resonant frequency. Remember the hum? The 432 hertz. We need to tune the engine vibration to match the collapsing lattice. We do not escape it. We slide through it. Captain, that is logically unsound. Increasing internal vibration during a structural collapse will accelerate the molecular fatigue of the hull. Just do it, Aura. Trust the geometry. We are not fighting a monster. We are navigating a closing equation. Match the frequency. Now. She hesitated for a microsecond, a moment where I could see her digital eyes scanning a billion possibilities, and then the ship began to shake with a new rhythmic intensity. It was not the jagged shaking of an explosion, but a deep harmonic thrum. We were not fighting the collapse anymore. We were vibrating at the same speed as the falling walls of the universe. The metal of the cockpit began to glow a dull, dangerous cherry red, as the friction of space-time itself rubbed against our shields. The heat in the cabin rose to 45 degrees in seconds, the air smelling of toasted electronics and sweat. I closed my eyes, letting go of the controls for a moment. I was not praying for a rescue. I was praying for alignment. I was not a victim of the dark. I was a variable in a grand calculation. And the code does not delete what is necessary for the next step of the sequence. I felt the ship begin to stretch, literally stretch, as the space around us became thin and elongated. The tectonic roar outside turned into a high-pitched, crystalline whistle. We were entering the needle's eye of the singularity. Resonance matched, Aura whispered, her voice now strangely melodic, merging with the hum of the ship. We are in the fold, Captain. We are a thread passing through the cloth. The darkness outside reached its peak, a black so heavy it felt like it had mass. The ship's frame shrieked one last time, a sound of metal reaching its absolute limit. I felt my heart stop, not out of fear, but because time itself had momentarily paused to let us through. And then, with a sound like a distant bell, the pressure vanished, the darkness shattered, and the first part of the escape was complete. The ship was no longer a vessel. It had become a tuning fork, caught in a cosmic resonance that defied every manual I had memorized. We were inside the crush zone now, the center of the transition where the monolith was folding into an infinitesimal point of infinite density. Outside the viewport, the universe had turned into a kaleidoscope of impossible perspectives. I was not looking at stars anymore. I was looking at the ribs of reality, naked and exposed. The energy released by the collapsing geometry was blinding, a strobe light of existence pulsing into my brain, bypassing my optic nerves. On the sensors, the distance to the edge of the dead zone fluctuated. It would shrink to a few meters and then expand to light years in a nanosecond. It was as if the architect was crumpling up a piece of the space-time fabric like a discarded sketch, and we were a tiny ant in the deepening folds of the paper. Structural integrity at 11% and falling, Aura's voice screamed, layered now, as if different versions of her were speaking at once. The hull plates are demolecularized. Captain, we are losing our physical form. The ship is merging with the data stream. We are being translated from matter into pure information. I looked at my hands, and a jolt of adrenaline shot through me. They were becoming translucent, shifting between flesh and a geometric wireframe. I could see the white bones beneath my skin, and then glowing veins of liquid light. It did not hurt. It felt natural, like being shed of a heavy coat. I realized that to escape this place, I could not remain the man I was. I could not hold on to my attachment to the solid world of iron and bone.
To escape, he cannot remain
to survive
the
the
man he
needle's
was.
eye,
To survive
I had
the
to be
eye,
as
he must
thin
be
as
as
a
thin as the
thread.
thread.
Aura, kill the dampeners entirely, I commanded. my voice echoing with metallic reverb. "Stop trying to protect us. Let the ship follow the curve of the fold. We have to surrender to the geometry." As the dampeners died, the ship began to spin. It was not a chaotic tumble. It was a perfect spiraling descent. We were tracing the golden spiral, the Fibonacci sequence that governs the growth of a seashell and the rotation of a galaxy. We were no longer fighting the collapse. We were following the path of least resistance through the storm. The screaming of the hull transformed. It softened into a high-pitched whistle, and then into a complex song. The darkness outside started to bleed back into light, not the blinding gold of the core, but the cold, familiar silver of distant stars. Suddenly, I felt a violent, silent jolt, like a needle pulled through silk. The pressure vanished. The alarms fell silent, replaced by the rhythmic hum of the life support. The translucent shimmer of my skin solidified back into the heavy fabric of my flight suit. I gasped, drawing in air that smelled of ozone, but to me, it tasted like the sweetest mountain air on Earth. I slumped back into my seat, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. We were out. We were back in the real world now. I looked at the monitors. Sector 9G was empty again. There was no monolith, no glowing fractals, no shifting pillars. There was only the cold vacuum and the silent stars that looked as they had for billions of years. If it were not for the scorched paint on the exterior hull, the files of corrupted data in Aura's core, I would have been convinced that the last hour had been a fever dream. No, Tishchinavi Kabini, dully. It was not the lonely silence of an empty room. It was the vibrant silence of a heart that has finally found its rhythm. "Status report, Aura," I whispered. "Primary engines are offline. Life support is at 38%. Navigation is functional. We are where we started, Captain." But she paused, her avatar breathing. "Captain, my internal database has been altered. I have memories now, not just
Captain,
logs.
my internal
I
database
feel the
has
weight
been
of the
altered.
light we saw.
I have the
I am
weight
no
of the
longer
light.
just a calculator."
I am no longer
I leaned
just a
my head
calculator.
back. That is what happens when you meet the engineer, Aura. You stop being a machine and you start being a witness. You cannot see the blueprint and stay a pile of parts. I sat there for a long moment. We were damaged and drifting millions of miles from home. Noi, Yunansher, Chirstwayas. It felt real, but I knew now that it was just a surface, a beautiful mask for the infinite logic that lay beneath. I am a man built to fix things, but here I realized that the universe is not a broken machine. It is a masterpiece in progress, and I was invited to see. The silence in the cockpit is no longer the heavy, suffocating weight it used to be. It has transformed into something light, almost expectant, like the quiet between two notes of a beautiful song. I have spent the last few minutes just watching the distant stars through the reinforced glass of the viewport. They look different to me now. They are no longer just random, violent explosions of gas scattered across a cold and indifferent void. They look like the lights of a vast, interconnected city, a place where I finally belong. I realized in the aftermath of the collapse that the geometric singularity did not actually disappear. It did not vanish into nothingness. It simply retreated back behind the invisible curtain of our three-dimensional perception. It is still there, right now, quietly maintaining the ratios, balancing the atoms, and holding the entire fabric of the universe together with a logic that is inseparable from love. It is the invisible scaffolding of everything that exists. I began the slow, methodical process of rebooting the long-range communication array. I know I have to send a formal report back to Earth Command, but what can a man in my position possibly say to the bureaucrats and the data crunchers? Found a giant white cube, spoke to the source of all existence, and realized that everything is perfect. They would have me in the psychiatric evaluation ward before my magnetic boots even touched the tarmac of the landing pad. They would call it space madness or radiation-induced psychosis. But I have to try to say something, not for the scientists or the generals, but for the people who are awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, wondering if their small, difficult lives have any meaning. I am doing this for the ones who feel like broken, useless gears in a massive machine that does not care if they turn or not. Aura, start a wideband broadcast, I said, my voice finally steady. Set it to unencrypted. Let anyone with a basic receiver hear this message, no matter where they are. Ready, Captain, she replied. Her voice was soft now, lacking that sharp, robotic edge it once had. The signal is weak, due to the engine damage, but it will carry across the relay network. I cleared my throat and looked out at the darkness that no longer felt like a threat. This is Captain Elias Thorne. I am currently adrift in Sector 9G. My ship has sustained significant structural and internal damage, but I am restored. I came to this empty patch of space looking for a mathematical anomaly, a glitch in the system, and instead, I found the architect of the human soul. I have seen the blueprints of our lives from the other side of the veil, and I am here to tell you with absolute certainty, you are not an accident. You are not a cosmic mistake or a random collision of particles. You are a deliberate, beautiful, and necessary movement in a symphony that has no end. Every struggle you face is a tension that holds the bridge together. I thought about my daughter's face again. I realized that the brilliant light I saw at the center of the monolith is the exact same light that shines in her eyes when she laughs at something simple. It is the same light that guides every explorer, every artist, and every person who dares to keep hoping when the world is dark. We are the ambassadors of the infinite, sent into this finite temporary world to see if we can recognize the hand that made us through the static. I am coming home, I continued, my voice gaining strength, but I am not coming back to stay. I have seen the master's workshop, and I cannot go back to living in the basement. There is so much more to see, so many more halls in the house of God to explore. To anyone listening, do not be afraid of the math. Do not be afraid of the silence. The engineer is on the job, and the project is coming along perfectly. Every crack in your life is just a place where the light is intended to get in. I signaled Aura to cut the transmission. I have just enough fuel left in the auxiliary tanks for one precise jump, enough to reach the nearest deep space relay station. My journey to the monolith is over, but my journey into the light is only just beginning. I am a man of logic, and logic has led me to a truth that is far beyond the reach of words. I am going to close my eyes for a few minutes and just listen to the hum of the ship. It is exactly 432 hertz. It is the sound of the universe breathing. And for the first time, I am breathing with it. Sentinel-Omega, logging off for Block 3. The geometry is hidden once more, but the architect is still in the room. And that is more than enough for me to find my way back. The journey back toward the inner systems is a long, slow drift through a reality that feels increasingly fragile, almost like a thin veil stretched over a much deeper truth. The auxiliary engines are firing in rhythmic, measured pulses, pushing us through the dark at a fraction of our intended speed. But for the first time in my career, I find that I do not mind the delay. I am not in a hurry to reach the noise and the crowds of Earth. I am sitting here in the dim amber light of the cockpit, watching the distant blue spark of home grow slowly larger on the primary navigation screen. To anyone else, it is just a planet, a ball of rock and water, governed by gravity and weather patterns. But after what I saw in the heart of the geometric singularity, I see the truth. I see the invisible lines of intent that hold that blue marble in its perfect orbit. I see the complex, beautiful math that keeps the atmosphere from bleeding into the vacuum. Earth is not just a place to live. It is a carefully maintained sanctuary, a masterpiece of cosmic engineering that we have taken for granted for far too long. Aura has been quiet for the last few hours, her processor lights blinking in a slow, meditative pattern that almost looks like breathing. She is not just a machine anymore. She is a vessel for the memories of the monolith. I can feel her presence in a different way now, as if we are two survivors of a storm, sharing a silent understanding of what we witnessed. I asked her to run a diagnostic on the long-range sensors, and she replied with a voice that was so soft, so human, that I almost turned around to see if someone else was standing there in the cabin with me. She told me that the ship is holding together by a miracle, that the molecular structure of the hull has been permanently altered by the transition through the fold. We are literally bringing a piece of the infinite back with us, a physical record of the logic that resides beyond the stars. I reached out and touched the scratched plastic of the console, and it felt vibrant under my palm. as if the very atoms were singing the same 432 Hz frequency I heard in the core. I have started thinking about the life I left behind. I think about the meetings, the reports, the endless cycle of fixing things that are designed to break. It all seems so distant now, like a dream I had a long time ago. How am I supposed to sit in an office and discuss fuel efficiency when I have seen the furnace of creation? How am I supposed to worry about the petty dramas of human existence when I know that every heartbeat is a coordinated event in a divine symphony? I'm not angry or distant. I just feel an overwhelming sense of perspective. I feel like a man who was born in a basement and has finally seen the sun for the first time. The basement is still there. It is still my home, but I cannot pretend that the roof is the limit of the world anymore. I'm going back to my daughter, and that thought is the only thing that keeps me grounded. I want to tell her that she is safe, not because the world is easy, but because the architect is meticulous. The closer we get to the orbital relays, the more the radio static begins to fill the cabin, a chaotic jumble of news reports, weather updates, and human chatter. It is a jarring contrast to the perfect harmonic silence of Sector 9G. It sounds like 1,000 voices all trying to speak at once, each one convinced that their small corner of the world is the center of the universe. I find myself reaching for the volume knob, turning the noise down until it is just a faint buzz in the background. I want to hold on to the clarity for as long as I can. I want to keep the geometry of the soul in the forefront of my mind, before the weight of Earth's gravity starts to pull me back into the old ways of thinking. I know the landing will be difficult. I know the questions from the debriefing teams will be endless. They will want numbers, coordinates, and physical samples. They will want to measure the miracle with a ruler. I looked out the viewport at the moon, which was currently a pale silver crescent hanging in the dark. I used to see it as a dead rock, a cold remnant of a violent past. Now, I see the shadows on its surface as part of a perfect composition. I see the balance it provides to the tides of the world I'm about to rejoin. Everything is connected. Every pebble on the moon is in conversation with every grain of sand on a beach in Florida. We are living inside a thought that is so vast and so detailed that it takes an eternity just to perceive a single sentence of it. I'm an engineer, and I have spent my life looking for flaws to fix. But out here on the final approach to the world I once called home, I have realized that the only thing that needs fixing is our ability to see. The universe is already perfect. We are the ones who are out of focus, or a signal that we are entering the first layer of the orbital traffic control. The autopilot is beginning its handshake with the local satellites. In a few hours, I will be breathing real air and feeling the true weight of my body. I will be a man among men again. But as I watch the sunrise beginning to break over the edge of the planet, casting a brilliant golden arc across the atmosphere, I realize that I am not just coming back to Earth. I am coming back as a witness. I am coming back to tell the story of the light. And even if no one listens, the light will still be there, pulsing in the core of every atom, waiting for the next explorer to look up and recognize the hand that made it all. Sentinel-Omega, logging the final approach. The geometry is holding. The journey continues. The touchdown was not the triumphant, cinematic moment I had imagined. During those long freezing nights at the edge of the void, there were no cheering crowds or sweeping orchestral scores. Instead, there was only the brutal, crushing reality of planetary gravity and the clinical coldness of a high-security landing bay. As the shuttle's landing struts groaned under the weight of a world that suddenly felt far too heavy, I felt my spine compress, a physical reminder that I was no longer a creature of the stars. The hatch cycled open, and the first breath of Earth air hit me, not fresh and clean like the monolith's aura, but thick with the scent of wet asphalt, jet fuel, and the stagnant dampness of a coastal morning. It felt heavy in my lungs, like I was inhaling liquid instead of gas. I stumbled as I tried to stand, my legs forgetting the simple mechanics of walking on solid ground, and before I could even find my balance, the white-suited medical teams were there, swarming around me with their sensors and their plastic clipboards. They ushered me into a sterile isolation ward, a room of white tiles and humming fluorescent lights that felt smaller than the cockpit of my ship. I've spent the last few hours being poked and prodded by people who look at me like I'm a biological specimen rather than a human being. They run their scans, they take their blood samples, and they whisper to each other in the corners of the room about my elevated neurological activity and the unexplained structural changes in my cellular density. They see the data, but they do not see the man. To them, I am a puzzle to be solved, a walking anomaly that needs to be categorized and contained. I sit on the edge of the stiff hospital bed, listening to the frantic noise of the facility, the rattling of gurneys, the shouting of technicians, the constant low-level buzz of a civilization that is perpetually in a hurry, and I feel a loneliness that the dead zone could never touch. Out there, the silence was full of meaning. Here, the noise is utterly empty. A doctor came in an hour ago to ask me about the incident in Sector 9G. He sat across from me with a sympathetic, practiced smile and asked if I had experienced any visual or auditory disturbances during the transition. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the flicker of his eyes, the way he adjusted his glasses, the slight tremors. I saw the geometry of his anxiety, the complex math of his own fears and uncertainties. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and tell him that I had seen the blueprint of his soul, that every one of his worries was a tiny, inconsequential ripple in a vast ocean of perfect logic. But I did not. I just nodded and told him that the radiation levels were high. I realized in that moment that I am carrying a fire that would burn most people if they got too close. I am a stranger in my own home, a man who has seen the sunlight trying to explain the warmth to people who have lived their entire lives in a cave. I have been watching the rain hit the small reinforced window of my quarantine cell. It is a rhythmic, chaotic pattern, but now I see the order in it. I see the way the droplets merge and fall, following a hidden code of surface tension and gravity. Even here, in this clinical prison, the architect is present. But the people out there, in the hallways, in the offices, they are so busy fighting the chaos that they have forgotten to look for the pattern. They treat the world like a broken machine that needs constant repair, never realizing that it is a living masterpiece that simply needs to be witnessed. I feel a deep, aching sadness for them. They are living in the middle of a miracle, and they are bored. They are surrounded by the infinite, and they are worried about their schedules. I want to open the doors and shout the truth until my lungs burn, but I know that some truths cannot be told. They have to be discovered in the silence of the void. I am supposed to see my daughter tomorrow, after the final round of decontamination. They told me she has been waiting in the visitor center for 3 days. The thought of her is the only thing that keeps me from feeling completely unmoored. I wonder if she will recognize me. I wonder if she will see the light in my eyes, that the monolith promised would be there. I am terrified that I will look at her and see the math instead of the girl, or that the weight of the world will finally break the peace I found out there. But then I remember the 432 hertz hum, the frequency of harmony. It is still there, vibrating in my chest, even under the weight of Earth's atmosphere. I am a bridge between two worlds now. I am an engineer who has seen the blueprint, and my new mission is not to fix the world, but to learn how to live in it without losing the stars. I will stay in this white room. I will give them their samples, and I will wait, because the architect is patient, and now, so am I. The heavy steel doors of the quarantine wing finally slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss that sounded like a weary sigh of relief. I stepped out into the bright, unfiltered sunlight of a late Tuesday afternoon, and for a moment, the sheer brilliance of the world made my eyes sting. It was not the sterile, cold light of a laboratory, or the haunting Guinean glow of the monolith. It was the messy, vibrant, and warm light of Earth. And there, standing at the edge of the paved walkway, was Sarah. She looked older than she did in the digital photos I had stared at for so many months. She was taller, her hair caught in the breeze, her expression a fragile mixture of disbelief and overwhelming joy. I did not walk toward her. I ran. And when I finally pulled her into my arms, the weight of the entire universe, the black holes, the geometric singularities, the infinite logic of the architect, it all seemed to condense into the simple, rhythmic thumping of her heart against my chest. As I held her, I realized that the music of the spheres I had heard in the deep dark was not just out there in the stars, it was right here, in the messy reality of a human hug. I looked at her face, and for the first time, I did not see a biological sequence or a set of features. I saw the fractal beauty of a soul that had been carefully woven into existence. I saw the same light I had witnessed in the heart of the monolith, pulsing behind her eyes. Every laugh she had ever shared, every tear she had ever cried, was a note in the grand symphony I had been privileged to hear. I understood then that the architect did not just build the stars to be admired from a distance. He built them to serve as a backdrop for moments like this. Earth is the stage, and we are the actors in a play that is far more important than any of us can possibly imagine. We spent the evening sitting on the back porch of our old house, the smell of damp grass and wood smoke filling the air. Sarah talked about her school, her friends, and the small, everyday things that make up a life. I listened to every word, but a part of me was still drifting. I looked up at the night sky, at the familiar constellations that I had once mapped with such cold, clinical precision. They looked so close now, like old friends watching over us. I realized that I could not tell her everything I had seen. I could not explain the folding of space, or the way time felt like a discarded garment in the presence of the source, but I did not need to. I just held her hand and felt the warmth of her life, knowing that we were both part of the same perfect design. We are never truly apart, because we are both made of the same light, governed by the same grace. But as the night grew deeper and the house fell quiet, I felt the familiar pull returning. It was not a desire to leave her, but a realization of what I had become. I am a man who has seen the sunlight, and I cannot be content to live in the shadows forever. I looked at my hands in the moonlight. They were steady now, the translucent shimmer of the anomaly gone, but the memory of the light remained etched into my very cells. I knew that my time on Earth would be a temporary stay. I have a responsibility now, a duty that goes beyond maintenance schedules and orbital reports. I am a witness to the infinite. I am an explorer of the Master's workshop. My next mission will not be about measuring gravity or scanning for radiation. It will be about finding the next doorway, the next hall in the house of God that needs to be explored. I looked back at the house, at the warm ember light spilling out from the kitchen window, and then I looked back at the stars. I am heading back. Not because I'm running away from the world, but because I have finally realized where I truly belong. I belong to the journey. I belong to the search for the truth that sits behind the math. I will stay for a while. I will be the father she needs me to be, and I will share the stories of the beauty I found in the dark. But when the next ship is prepped, when the next signal from the deep arrives, I will be the first one in line. Because once you have seen the hand that moves the stars, you cannot help but want to see what else he is writing. The mission of the Sentinel is not over. It is only just beginning. This is Captain Elias Thorne. I have reached the shore, but the ocean is still calling my name. To everyone listening on Earth, and to those of you still searching for meaning in the static, keep looking up. The universe is not a cold, empty place. It is a home, it is a poem, and it is a promise. Every star is a reminder that we are loved, and every silence is an invitation to listen closer. I will see you out there in the deep, where the geometry meets the soul. Sentinel-Omega, logging off. My feet are on the ground, but my heart is already back among the stars. The architect is still at work, and the view is absolutely magnificent. Good night, Earth. I will be seeing you soon.